Is it a sin? Is it a crime? Loving you, dear, like I do. If it's a crime, then I'm guilty, guilty of loving you. Maybe I'm wrong, dreaming of you, dreaming the lonely night through. If it's a crime, then I'm guilty, guilty of dreaming of you. What can I do? What can I say after I've taken the blame? You say you're through, you'll go your way, but I'll always feel the same. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, loving you, dear, like I do. If it's a crime, then I'm guilty, guilty of loving you.
You go to my head, and you linger like a haunting refrain, and I find you spinning round in my brain. Like the bubbles in a glass of champagne.
I know a little cowslip and a pretty flower too, who wished she was a bluebell and had a robe of blue. What would you think of a girl who began one of her earliest attempts at writing at the tender age of 11 with those very words? Well, I should hope you'd think rather kindly of her, because I am that girl who grew up to become reputedly, after the Bible and Shakespeare, the most widely published author in the world. They called me the Queen of Crime. I've been rather shy in public my whole life, but at this moment I can hardly think of anything that has made me happier than to meet you and to finally introduce myself as Agatha Christie. So won't you come in? Please sit down, make yourself comfortable. Oh, yes, I predominantly wrote murder mysteries. More on murder mysteries in a moment. But allow me to tell you that between my birth in 1890 and my death in 1976, I wrote on average a book a year throughout my 85 years. More than one family around the world looked forward to another Christmas with Christie as each annual publication approached. Now, if you will allow me, indulge me. I have about an hour before I must go out again, and I would like to take that time to tell you a bit about myself that you may not already know, and to try to bring alive again some of the words I wrote. But for starters, shall we have tea? Queen of crime, pouring my own tea. Oh, my dears, this life of mine, of being Agatha Christie, it's been more than just writing about murders and poisons and mustachioed detectives. Oh, no. I did that too. But I was not always the old lady that you may have seen in pictures. I, too, was once young, such as you, and not just sitting in some library, having a glass of tea, just dreaming up adventures. No, I had them. I traveled the world to exotic locale like Baghdad and the River Nile and Zambezi, even Hawaii. I was born Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller in the country of England, in the Shire of Devon, in the town of Torquay by the English Channel. Oh, I love to swim. And growing up around all these tourists always coming and going and going and coming, and maybe that's why I love to go. Can you picture me in Honolulu riding a surfboard? The first woman to do so, or helping archaeologists push their cots out of the mud in Iraq. Indeed, I have done it all, despite being a rather spoiled child. At home, I had, a host of aunties and grannies and Nursey, and not to mention our big-hearted cook, Jane. Oh, she filled me with cream cakes and cream teas and a lifelong propensity for, well, filling. Cake? No. Pardon me. My mother, Clara, was English. But did you know that my father, a Mr. Frederick Alva Miller, was American? Despite that, a rather agreeable man. He was a man of independent means, wealthy. He provided a middle-class, most comfortable upbringing, perhaps even indulgent upbringing. And my mummy, my mummy Clara, I have written about her, an enigmatic personality. Oh, she was arresting and more forceful than my father, but also miserably shy, with a natural melancholy. Mummy was always trying on various religions and philosophies, and she was remarkably intuitive, perhaps even psychic. She viewed the world with a mystic turn of mind, always at variance with reality. She could be startling. She once told me a bedtime story about a poison candle. Which I shall never forget.
We were Agatha's only siblings, Monty.
Madge.
We were more than a decade her seniors.
And often away at boarding schools.
So that Agatha was brought up almost like an only child.
Her loneliness,
plus our mother's ways, must have contributed to Agatha's attraction at an early age to make-believe.
Mummy sent us all to boarding school, but when the little one came along, she somehow turned against the formal education of young girls and forbade Agatha from even learning to read before she was 8.
So I, the little one, taught myself to read by age 5. I suppose it's because nowadays children go to school and they have everything arranged for them that they seem so forlornly unable to produce their own ideas.
But Agatha did seem to inherit something important from Mummy.
And from our grandmother, too.
Yes, they seem to pass along to her an almost family gene of having a keen sense of observation, even dissection of human nature.
Watching people became my entertainment. It inspired me. When I became known as a writer, I didn't like to be interviewed and didn't really speak publicly about my process. But I will tell you, I did write a bit about it in the foreword of one of my books. A Body in the Library. This one has my favorite reoccurring character, Miss Jane Marple.
Ah, the village spinster. Plain, unassuming Jane Marple, just a home gardener. And I invariably turned out to be the most surprisingly shrewd, remarkably cognizant amateur sleuth.
Miss Marple employed her observation of small town life, and some would say nosiness,
Natural inquisitiveness.
to draw astute parallels in solving seemingly unsolvable murders. Oh, pardon me. As Miss Marple herself said,
I'm a horror at digressing.
but back to A Body in the Library. Now, where did I get my characters for Miss Marple to watch? Staying one summer for a few days at a fashionable hotel by the seaside, I observed a family at one of the tables in the dining room. An elderly man, a cripple, in a wheelchair, and with him was a female of the younger generation. Fortunately, the next day they left, so my imagination could get to work unhampered by any kind of knowledge.
Do you put real people in your books?
For me, it is quite impossible to write about anyone that I know or indeed have ever spoken to or have even heard of. For some reason, for me, it kills them stone dead.
Excuse the metaphor.
But I can take a lay figure and endow it with qualities and imaginings of my own. So an older man and a younger female from that hotel sighting became the pivot of my story. Oh, in the manner of a cookery recipe, add the following ingredients: a tennis pro, a young dancer, an artist, a girl guide, a dance hostess, and serve it all up a la Miss Marple in A Body in the Library.
Dear me, I wonder who that could be. This early in the morning, I'm barely up myself. It must be a wrong number. Yes. Why, yes, this is Jane. You're up very early, Dolly. Oh, my dear, what awful thing has just happened? You've just found a body in the library. You found a what? Oh, I know. One doesn't believe it, does one? I mean, one thinks they only happen in books. But whose body is it? Oh, it's a blonde. A what? A blonde? A beautiful blonde, like the books again. None of you have ever seen her before, and she's just lying there in the library, dead. And that's why I've got to come up at once. You want me to come up? You're sending the car down for me? Oh, of course, dear. If you think I can be of any comfort to you and the Colonel. Oh, you don't want comfort? I'm so good at bodies. Oh, no, indeed. My little successes have been mostly theoretical. But you think I'm very good at murders. Oh, you feel that if one has got to have a murder in one's house, one may as well enjoy it. And, well, I know what you mean. And that's why you want me to come and help you find out who did it and unravel the mystery and all that. Yes, yes, it is rather thrilling, isn't it? Well, of course, my dear, if I can be of any help to you. Now, good advice is always certain to be ignored, but that's no reason why we shouldn't give it anyway. Oh, yes, of course, Dolly. Yes. Yes, I know your husband, the Colonel. And you say Arthur's, yes, the Colonel's acting rather suspiciously. He seems to think you shouldn't enjoy yourself about it at all. Of course, you do know it's very sad and all that. But you say you don't know the girl. And when I've seen her, I'll understand what you mean when you say she doesn't look real at all. Yes, I will. Goodbye, Dolly.
Let's all applaud Miss Marple while she gets dressed and ready to solve another mystery. Death. As Dolly told Jane in her call, when people die, they usually don't look real at all. I was only 11. My father died. My mother had known him since she was 10. Most of my father's fortune had already been lost by then due to his bad investments. My brother Monty squandered the rest. In any case, Monty was off somewhere in India with the army. And my sister Madge, the one who first dared me to write a mystery story better than the ones she read me, well, she had her own family by then. And so it was only Mum and I, a middle-aged woman and a preteen left together after Father's death. We were no longer a family. We were now two people living together. A middle-aged woman and an untried, naive girl. Well, naive was my own word choice, but let me tell you that I did get to go to France for finishing school. Something else you might not know about me. I had 2 husbands. In 1912, when I was 22 and he just 23, I met a dashing young aviator named Archie Christie. Can you imagine his daring to be a pilot less than 9 years after the Wright brothers' first flight of only 9 seconds? Well, never you mind, Archie. The year before we met, I had already taken a ride in an aeroplane at a county fair. I always remember him looking different. Younger, maybe?
World War I interfered with wedding plans for Agatha and me.
Not to mention lack of money.
The Royal Flying Air Corps dispatched me to France while Agatha stayed home and found work in a hospital.
During both World Wars, I worked as a pharmacy assistant and picked up some, shall we say, chemical backgrounds to help in future poisonous plot lines.
We married during my brief home leave on Christmas Eve, 1914. But it wasn't until 4 years later that I was finally posted home for London for good.
And much the worse for wear from the rigors of war, believe me.
I left the service for a job touring the world, soliciting support for the 1924 British Empire exhibition in London. My employer,
a former headmaster of Archie's,
paid both our ways to the world for all sorts of adventures,
including surfboarding. When we got home, we bought property outside a London golf course. I tried my hand at golf, less than successfully. Meanwhile, Mr. Christie began making rounds of another sort with another female golfer. He moved into the clubhouse And that was the end for me and Archie, the golfing pilot. We divorced in 28, and he married his putting partner, a Miss Nancy Neal. Remember that name. They told me to follow your heart. Well, I did. And it got broken. I was overwrought at first. But by then I had published a handful of books as Agatha Christie. And by then I had a literary agent and I could fend for myself. So, to clear my head of golf balls and other personal matters, I took off again, this time on my own, to parts unknown, like Iraq and Istanbul, the River Nile, and riding a train called the Orient Express. My travels brought me more inspiration from my novels, as well as an occasional bedbug or two, and a new husband, a Mr. Max Mallowan. He was an archaeologist first introduced to me to act as my guide.
We married in 1930. She used the name Agatha Christie Mallowan on some of her books, and then enthusiastically collaborated with me on my Middle Eastern digs.
I especially love photography.
Agatha also wrote a few romantic novels, 6 to be in fact. Her publishers wanted her to write only more books about crime. So for the romances, she used a pseudonym, Mary Westmacott. Her second name was Mary, and Westmacott was some distant relative's family name. The public was clueless. Christie and Mary Westmacott were the same writer for almost 20 years until a newspaper columnist revealed it. Now, back to the Middle East, where we find a happy couple still exploring together.
For all that digging, Max was eventually knighted.
And for all that writing, Agatha was bestowed the highest honor a woman could receive in England when she was named a dame.
Max was 14 years younger than me. But the good thing about being married to an archaeologist, the older I got, the more valuable I was to him. We stayed happily married for the rest of my earthly days, my shovel-wielding knight.
And his dusty old dame.
Like most Brits of the day, Max and I loved listening to radio dramatizations. Can you imagine almost again hearing one of my stories acted out? This time with perhaps that most famous character of mine. Oh, I will admit that I Dreamed Up was inspired by many Belgian immigrants that I met during the wars. Oh, that priggish, fastidious, intrusive former inspector of a man whom the public loved him when I no longer did. They wouldn't let me leave off. I had him killed off in one of my books. Why, he became the only fictional character to get an obituary on the front page of the New York Times. But I grew to love him. After all, he made me my living. Hercule Poirot, I can't hear you. There you are.
Hello, Madam Christie.
Hercule Poirot.
Coming to you live from the British Broadcasting Studios, an encore presentation of Poirot Tells a Story by Dame Agatha Christie, with Victoria Casey as Miss Petherick, Stuart Lawrence Frazier as Hercule Poirot, and yours truly, Robert James, as Mr. Rhodes.
Oh, the first I knew of this business was one evening about 9 o'clock when Gwen, you remember Gwen, my little maid with red hair. Well, Gwen came in and told me,
Miss Petherick and a gentleman have called to see you, me dear.
"Oh, bring in the cherry brandy and some glasses, and I will meet them in the drawing room."
Miss Petherick. She has been a friend of Poirot for many years, and she introduces her cousin, a Mr. Rhodes. Now, Poirot immediately recognizes Mr. Rhodes's manner as most peculiar. Poirot might have called it rude if he hadn't noticed the poor fellow was suffering from strain.
Miss Patrick, a brandy.
Oh, thank you, mon ami.
And you, Mr. Rhodes, a brandy. Mr. Rhodes.
Right.
Well, if Mr. Rhodes is, how you say, perhaps feeling ill, eh?
Ill. I expect to die of a broken neck in a few months' time.
Oh, dear. Well, Miss Patrick, maybe you can explain the reason for your visit, eh?
Well, what I have brought my cousin, Mr. Rhodes, here for is a consultation.
A consultation?
A consultation. You see, Rhodes is about to be arrested for the murder of his wife, the late Mrs. Rhodes, and Miss Patrick has brought him to see Poirot into some insight to a possible defense for him. Rhodes, a newcomer to Poirot, remains unconvinced of the former inspector's value to him.
I'm still highly skeptical of this Poirot being of any use.
Now, Mr. Rhodes, sit back down, please.
But if the gentleman will hear my story, I will tell it.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Please proceed, eh?
My wife, Mrs. Rhodes, and I had been staying at the Crown Hotel in Barnchester.
Oh, only 20 miles away, yes?
Yes.
We occupied adjoining rooms with a connecting inner door. Frankly, she was a bit of a hypochondriac. So she had retired to her room immediately after dinner. I'd settled down in my adjoining room to work on my book on prehistoric flints. At 11 o'clock, I tidied up my papers.
On prehistoric flint?
Aye, prehistoric flints. Glanced in my wife's room to make sure there was nothing she wanted before going to bed myself. I discovered the electric light on and my wife lying stabbed through the heart.
Mon Dieu!
His wife had been dead at least an hour, probably longer. There was a separate door in Mr. Rhodes's room leading directly into the corridor from there. That door was locked and bolted on the inside. In addition, the only window in her room was closed and latched from the inside as well. Now, according to Mr. Rhodes, nobody had passed through the room in which he was sitting except the chambermaid bringing hot water bottles. Now, the weapon found in the wound was a stiletto dagger, which Mrs. Rhodes had kept next to her on her dressing table.
She was in the habit of using it as a paper knife.
Oh, convenient, eh?
There were no fingerprints on it.
And the chambermaid?
Mary Hill is a local woman. I've been a chambermaid at the Crown for 3 years up here on the second floor. There's no reason why I should make a sudden assault on a guest. The chambermaid, Mary Hill, is, in any case, extraordinarily stupid, almost half-witted. Her story never varies. I brought the lady a hot water bottle, and right away she went fast asleep. Frankly, I cannot believe, and I am sure no jury would believe, that she committed the crime.
Anything else, Mr. Rhodes?
Aye, witnesses of a sort.
Oh, el curios. Please go on, Mr. Rhodes.
Poirot, at the head of the staircase in the Crown Hotel is a kind of miniature lounge.
Where people sometimes sit and have coffee. Now, personally,
Did you want to get a cup of
I
coffee?
Even sugar.
prefer my English tea.
Aye. Passage goes off to the right from the coffee lounge, and the last door is the passage to the door to the room I occupied. The passage then turns sharply right again, and the first door around the corner is the door of my wife's room.
Mhm. As it happened, both these doors could be seen by witnesses.
And the authorities interview them.
Yes, the first door to Mr. Rhodes's room could be seen by 4 people who were having coffee. Now, personally, I wasn't one of them.
Nothing can beat the cool. Delicious.
According to them, nobody went through the door except the chambermaid.
As to the other door, right in the corner, my wife's room, there was an electrician by it, and he also swears nobody entered or left through that door except the chambermaid.
As the police investigation, you say, has definitively ruled out the chambermaid, Miss Peterick. On the face of it, Mr. Rhodes, it looks as though you must have murdered your wife.
Miss Peterick!
Shh.
And now, viewers, thank you so much for staying with us. We will now have a 3-minute intermission. Don't do anything to your screen. Don't touch that dial. Don't touch that mouse. We'll see you back here in 3 minutes. And now, viewers, thank you for joining us. And now let's get back for the thrilling conclusion of Poirot Tells a Story.
Loving you, dear, like I do.
Both these doors could be seen by witnesses.
And the authorities interview them, wait.
Yes, the first door to Mr. Rhodes' room could be seen by 4 people who were having coffee. Now, personally,
Nothing's better. We've got to have more cream and sugar.
according to them, nobody went through the door except the chambermaid.
As to the other door right in the corner, my wife's room, there's an electrician by it, And he also swears nobody left through that door except the chambermaid.
As the police investigation you say has definitively ruled out the chambermaid, Miss Petrick. On the face of it, Mr. Rhodes, it looks as though you must have murdered your wife.
Miss Petrick.
Shh. Oh. Tell Monsieur Perrault about the threatening letters.
Oh, letters?
Frankly, I never believed it. I thought Amy, my wife, made most of it up. Amy was one of those romantic liars who go through life embroidering everything that happens to them. If she slipped on a banana peel, it was a case of near escape from death. Her tale as to some woman whose child she had injured in a motor accident who had vowed vengeance on her, well, I'd simply not taken any notice of it. The supposed incident happened before we were married, and although she read me letters couched in crazy language, I had suspected her of composing them herself.
S'il vous plaît, Mr. Rhodes. Some cherry brandy, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. Merci.
Do you know if there have been any women staying by themselves at the hotel?
2, but no one had seen either of them near the scene of the crime, and there was nothing to connect either of them with it in any way.
Description.
Oh, yes. Now, the constable reported that there were 2. A Mrs. Granby, Anglo-Indian widow, having reddish hair, untidily done, 50 years of age, clothes rather picturesque, made mostly of native silk, etc. And Miss Carruthers, a horsey spinster who dropped her G's. Oh, you know, such as I'm coming and I'm going and looking. She was about 40, wore pince-nez, you know, those spectacles that have the little spring bridge on the nose, and they pinched them right there onto her nose. Now, Miss Carruthers had close-cropped hair like a man and wore mannish clothes and skirts, it was reported.
Yeah, me, that does make it very difficult.
And now, pardon me, Mr. Rhodes, but Monsieur Perrault, Mr. Rhodes really can't believe that his wife actually killed herself.
No, she wasn't that kind of woman.
And I have to believe him. Hysterical people don't usually commit suicide.
Did the door from Mrs. Rhodes's bedroom lead straight into the corridor?
No, there was a little hallway with a lavatory and a washstand to the left side before you went out of the suite into the corridor.
Well, in that case, the whole thing seems remarkably simple.
What?
Another drink, Mr. Rhodes?
Listen, you daft Belgian, perhaps you haven't quite appreciated the difficulties.
Yes, I think I have. There are but 4 possibilities. Either Mrs. Rhodes was killed by her husband, or by the chambermaid, or she committed suicide, or she was killed by an outsider whom nobody saw enter or leave.
But that's impossible. Nobody could go through my room without my seeing them. And even if anyone managed to come in through my wife's door without the electrician seeing them, now how the devil could they get out again, leaving the door locked and bolted from the inside?
Mr. Rhodes, what did the chambermaid look like?
I'm not sure. She was tallish, I guess. I don't remember.
Miss Petrick, what did authorities report the chambermaid look like?
Let's see, of medium height with fairish hair and blue eyes.
Well, perhaps the authorities are a better observer than I am.
Oh, I venture to disagree, Mr. Rhodes. Could you describe the maid in my house? She ushered you in, served us. Miss Petrick, could you?
No, sorry.
Well, don't you see what that means?
What?
You both came full of your own affairs, and the person who let you in was just a parlor maid. Huh? The same applies to Mr. Rhodes at the hotel. You only saw the woman's uniform and her apron, Mr. Rhodes. You were so engrossed in your work. But the police interviewed the same woman this hotel maid Mary Hill in a very different capacity. The authorities have looked at her as a person, and that's what the woman who did the murder counted upon.
How do you think it went, Monsieur Perrault?
I'm so glad you asked. The hotel chambermaid came in by Mr. Rhodes' door, passed through his room into Mrs. Rhodes' room with the hot water bottle, and then continued out into the public corridor through Mrs. Rhodes' room door. Now, X, as I will call our suspect, came in by Mrs. Rhodes' door, which was now unlocked, and concealed herself in the lavatory until the coast seemed clear. X then entered Mrs. Rhodes' bedroom, took the stiletto from the dressing table. She had doubtless explored the room earlier in that day, went up to the bed, stabbed the dozing woman, wiped the handle of the stiletto, locked and bolted Mrs. Rhodes' door from the inside, and then passed out through the adjoining room where Mr. Rhodes was working on prehistoric flint. Was it not, Mr. Rhodes?
Aye, prehistoric flints, but I should have seen her. And the electrician would have seen her go in.
Not if she were dressed as a chambermaid. Huh? You were so engrossed in your work, out of the tail of your eye, you saw a chambermaid go in and go into your wife's room and come back through your room.
Ah, so it was the same type of dress, but not the same woman.
And that's what the people having coffee.
Oh, well, I wasn't
Those
one
are
of them.
sure
because I
ones, or
really
you
like
want like a
coffee.
mocha?
That is exactly what they saw. A chambermaid go in and a chambermaid go out. The electrician in the array around the corner by Mrs. Rogers' door also saw the same. A chambermaid go out and in, not recognizing that they were two different persons.
Well, then who was she, this X?
Well, that's going to be a little difficult, isn't it? Either Mrs. Granby or Miss Carruthers.
As my creator, Dame Christie, said, unless you are good at guessing, it is not much use being a detective. Mrs. Granby sounds as though she might wear a wig normally, so she could wear her own hair as a chambermaid. On the other hand, Miss Carruthers, with a close-cropped mannish hair, might easily put on a wig to play a part. Personally, I incline myself to think it will be Miss Carruthers.
My dear Monsieur Hercule Peru, how do you think it was more likely to be Carruthers than Granby?
Well, it was the G's.
Geez.
You said authorities told you Carruthers dropped LGs.
Yes, the cheese.
Now, that's done by a lot of hunting people or haunting people in books, but I don't know many people who do it in reality these days, and certainly no one under 60. You said Carruthers was 40. Those
Yeah.
G's sound to me like a woman who was playing a part.
And overdoing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And really, my dears, it was Carruthers. That was a false name. Mrs. Rhodes, a most reckless driver, had run over her little girl, and it had driven the poor woman out of her head. She had been following Mrs. Rhodes for a while and had written her distinctly insane letters, which Mr. Rhodes chose not to believe because of his wife's precarious personality. So, when the false hair and the maid's dress and the truth were exposed, Miss Carruthers confessed at once and was taken away. And as for our Mr. Rhodes,
I have married again, such a nice, sensible girl. And we've got a wee little one now.
Oh.
And what do you think, Hercule? Would you be the godfather?
and After that radio drama, we ought to applaud them. Now, recalling Poirot, when I penned The Murder of Roger Ackroyd in 1926 as a Hercule Poirot mystery, even though it wasn't his first appearance, it was highly notorious because I wrote it so that the narrator's narration was called into question. And after all, if you can't trust the narrator, who can you trust? Anyway, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and that Hercule Poirot essentially thrust me into fame and launched my career.
The Guinness Book of World Records determined Agatha Christie to be the best-selling novelist of all time, selling approximately 3 billion books, so worldwide. And that was before Audible.
I once told someone about writing, I'm a sausage machine, a perfect sausage machine. I always think it must end soon. And then when another one comes along, I'm so happy to think that, well, thinking of something new wasn't as difficult as I thought. Now, why did I have such a career? My stories tied up thorny little problems into neat little packages by the end. And it's not like life. And maybe that's why people like them, do you think? And how did I come up with such intricate devices, you ask?
Well, I'll tell you. My Dame Agatha was in the habit of keeping notebooks all over the house, one next to the bed, one under the chair cushion, and one in the kitchen, and so on.
I always said the best time to plan a book is while you're doing the dishes.
When an idea for a character she might use comes into her head, she just reaches over and handwrites a note to herself in her nearest notebook.
Which is also handy for important dates, household budgets, and shopping lists.
And let's see, 1 head of lettuce, 2 liters of milk, half dozen eggs, and 10 little Indians.
And 10 Little Indians you may know now as the title, And Then There Were None. It was my best-selling novel. And then came my play and the motion picture of it. And speaking of plays that I wrote, in 1947, when Her Royal Highness Queen Mary, the grandmother of the current monarch Elizabeth, was asked what she would like to hear broadcast on BBC Radio for her birthday, well, we fully expected the good Queen Mum to say an opera or Shakespeare. But she replied with, we should prefer to hear an Agatha Christie mystery. Oh, so for my royal fan, I dashed off a short radio play called 3 Blind Mice. It's an original title, isn't it? Later, I expanded it for the London stage in 1952 and retitled it The Mousetrap. And tonight, The Mousetrap is still playing on the London stage. No, it is not tonight. It's not, but it's the longest, after a 7-decade uninterrupted run, nearly uninterrupted 7-decade run, much to my surprise of all people. And if you would like me to reveal the ending of the longest running play in history, well, keep liking. In fact, I stipulated that not a television nor motion picture of it be made until it closes in London. So you might want to plan a trip. Not now. Do not plan a trip. Stay home. Stay home. But speaking of trips, I've been to Hollywood. You may have seen photos of me on the set of the filming of my original play, A Witness for the Prosecution. Oh, there were Charles Lawton, his wife, Elsa Lanchester, Academy Award nominations for those two. When I met the rest of the cast, there were John Williams, Tyrone Power, Marlene Dietrich. And I've always appreciated Billy Wilder's faithful adaptation of my script about a seemingly loyal war bride, Christine Vole. She would do anything to save her husband from being hanged for the murder of another woman. Or would she turn on her husband and become a witness for the prosecution? Leonard Vole, the part played by Tyrone Power, has already been arrested and taken away on charge of murdering a female friend, it is thought, when Christine Vole suddenly appears at the law offices unannounced for her first interrogation by the defense team. Action.
My dear Mrs. Vole, I'm afraid we have rather bad news for you.
Don't be afraid, Sir Wilfred. I am quite disciplined.
Now, there's nothing to be alarmed about as yet.
Leonard has been arrested and charged with the murder of Mrs. French. Is that it? I knew he would be. I told him so. I knew that Leonard had been seeing Mrs. French quite frequently. I knew it from the day he came home with a pair of green socks she had knitted for him.
Well, that's quite natural, and I'm sure a jury will find it rather endearing.
Oh, Leonard can be very endearing. He hates that particular shade of green, and the socks were 2 sizes too small, but he wore them just the same, just to give her pleasure. Leonard has a way with women.
Now, Mrs. Vole, you realize that Mrs. French left your husband a lot of money.
Yes, a lot of money.
And of course, your husband had no previous knowledge of this bequest.
Is that what he told you?
Oh, surely, Mrs. Vole, you're not suggesting anything different?
No, I do not suggest anything.
Well, quite obviously, Mrs. French had come to look upon your husband as a son, or perhaps as a favorite nephew.
Oh, you think Mrs. French looked upon Leonard as a son or a nephew?
Oh, I do. A perfectly natural and understandable relationship.
What hypocrite you are in this country. Oh, I shock you. I'm so sorry. Let us say an aunt by all means.
Now, did you say that the socks Mrs. French knitted for your husband were 2 sizes too small?
At least.
Would that not indicate that she thought of him as a small boy, a nephew, for instance?
It indicates she did not know how to knit.
Mrs. Vole, you realize your husband's entire defense rests on his word and yours.
I realize that.
Now, on the night of the murder, your husband came home before 9:30. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
In fact, he remembers that it was precisely 9:26.
9:26.
Then it's true he was home with you at 9:26.
Precisely.
And he did not go out again.
Leonard came home at 9:26 and did not go out again. Isn't that what he wants me to say?
Isn't it the truth?
Of course.
You are aware, of course, that when I put you in the witness box, you will be sworn and you will testify under oath.
Leonard came home at precisely 9:26 and did not go out again. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Is that better?
Mrs. Vole, do you love your husband?
Leonard thinks I do.
Well, do you?
Am I already on the oath?
Mrs. Vole, whatever gambit you're playing here, do you know that under British law, you cannot be called to give testimony damaging to your husband?
How very convenient.
We are dealing with a capital crime. The prosecution will try to hang your husband.
He is not my husband. We went through a form of marriage in Hamburg, but I had a husband living in somewhere in East Germany at the time, in the Russian zone.
Did you tell Leonard?
It would have been stupid to tell him. He would have not married me, and I would have been left alone behind to starve in the rubble.
Your husband loves you very much, does he not?
Leonard, he worships the ground I walk on.
And you?
You want to know too much. Auf Wiedersehen, gentlemen.
That woman is up to something. But what?
Prosecution is going to break it down in no time if I put her in the witness box. You know, defending this case is going to be like shooting a fish in a barrel. And with a fish.
If you want to know what happens, read it, see it, extreme it on the Amazons, or perhaps see a live Zoom play. If you want to know about the mysteries of my own life, although that has been a topic that I have been more taciturn, Google it. After Archie and I were married, you remember Archie, my dashing pilot? We had our first and only child, named Rosalind, after Shakespeare's heroine in As You Like It. And as you know, Archie ran away to the links with Miss Neal, and he asked for a divorce. About the same time, my mummy Clara passed on. Abandoned by Archie, and left alone to close up Mummy's house and all those memories. I kissed baby Rosalind goodbye, and I left her in the good care of her governess. And then I drove away from it all. This is true. This is not a work of fiction.
Car was found abandoned and empty on a rural road in the middle of nowhere.
She had walked from there to the local spa, sequestered herself in the hotel.
I signed in as Miss Neal, Archie's girlfriend's name.
She remained alone, hidden by the public.
Hidden from everyone, more than a week passed.
Agatha never dreaming.
That police,
Aeroplanes.
Dogs.
even her contemporaries in mystery writing, like Dorothy Sayers.
And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who created Sherlock Holmes.
Psychics, the press worldwide.
Even my Archie hunted me.
It even made the New York Times.
We were band members at the hotel.
Of course, we heard of Agatha Christie's disappearance. It was everywhere.
And then we thought, oh, we recognize that lady right there. And so we reported to the police. And shortly after that, she was whisked away.
Photographs on front pages of papers and back to the hubbub of London, of life, of me. Oh, I'd always hated notoriety of any kind, and now I had such a dose of it that there were times when I could barely go on living. Oh, and everyone had a theory.
Personal strain.
An amnesiatic fugue.
Obviously, a publicity stunt.
A plot for her next book.
Stab at a failed marriage to Archie.
I felt like a fox hunted. My earths dug up and yelping hounds following me everywhere. They hounded me. But I have never made a public statement about it, nor in my autobiography explained my vacation. And neither will I today. In everybody's life, there are hidden chapters which we hope may never be known. This alone must remain the one Christie mystery forever unsolved. But I invite you to read and watch and discover again and join in solving those mysteries with Jane Marple and Hercule Poirot and Tommy and Tuppence and all my other creations, both familiar and unfamiliar to you. And to quote my favorite Miss Marple one last time, Now, I do hope you don't think I've been running on too long. Finally departing from you today, I must thank you for giving me this occasion to recall my happiest times and some of my challenges too. I have stated honestly and will say again to you that I like living. I've sometimes been wildly and despairingly and acutely miserable, racked with sorrow, but through it all, I still know that being alive is a grand thing. And I will leave you, if you'll bear with me one more moment, with a little nugget that I have written. Life seems to me to consist of 3 parts: the absorbing and usually enjoyable present, which rushes from minute to minute at fatal speed; the future, dim and uncertain, for which one could make any number of plans, the wilder and more elaborate, the better, and, well, as nothing you do will turn out as you plan anyway, you might as well have fun in the planning of it. And thirdly, the past, memories, the realities that are the bedrock of one's present life, brought back by a sudden scent, the shape of a hill, an old song, some triviality that makes one say with sudden and peculiar, quite unexplainable pleasure, I remember